Between March 20th of this year and today, the 21st of July, we have had over 10 different anti-government protests. 10. Yet, still nothing has changed. The endgame of these protests were to reduce the cost of living, which has become unbearably high in the country. Instead, 30 lives later, these protests seem to be counterproductive. Instead of the government taking measures that will assist its citizens and ultimately reduce the cost of living, they instead spit in our faces by doing the exact opposite and ignoring the demands of citizens on these streets. They exert illegal police force and harm everyone, including young children. They reduce our cries for justice and fair service to hunger for power. I know there's a lot to say on this particular topic, but there's only so much I can say in a single video. Firstly, I think it's important I begin by expressing my stance on the matter. Like I always say, I don't believe in neutral. You're either here or there. Neutral in itself is a side, and my side is I support protests unapologetically. It is a constitutional right that every single person has. For me to even be here creating YouTube videos, people protested for Africans to have their freedom. They lost lives, shed blood, and risked it all so that I could be here today, enjoying the privilege of existing freely in this world. I support protests because people protested for women to be allowed to have an education. Almost every right I enjoy as an African is because it was fought for. So when you ask me if I support protests, yes I do. Second thing I think I need to clarify before we even get into the meat of the video, which I also have a clear stance on, is whether I think the current protests in Kenya are justified. And again, hell yes. The cost of living in this country is actually unbearable. And just because you may not be feeling it, it doesn't mean others aren't. In fact, nowadays, I walk into shops and compare prices because the amount of exploitation that is happening in this country is insane. Listen to this fellow citizen who described the situation accurately, in my opinion. Bei ya sabuni imezidi bei ya karai. How?
Bei ya unga nimesema iko juu kuliko sufuria. Bei ya unga itashuka lini? Sabuni iko na bei kali kuliko karai ili wanaogea mwaka mzima. Sasa hii serikali yani ulituambia ni bottom up. Tuanze kunyanyasa mwananchi wa kawaida, tukifikia wale watu wako juu, mwananchi asaisa tayari.
Personally, I feel like we should start seriously boycotting businesses that are exploiting people. They need to be called out as well. Bei ya unga 200 shillings. I think we underestimate how so many people in this country can actually not comfortably afford this. It's very unreasonable. The cost of living is unreasonably high. That obviously can be argued to be out of the control of government, and therefore people should not protest. But shock unto you, the problem isn't even maybe that the cost of living is unreasonably high. It's that despite that, the government still takes various steps to make life even more unbearable for its citizens. At a time when things are already as bad as they are, our hustler-in-chief, President Ruto, not only signs a finance bill, the Finance Bill 2023, which is now an act that is very contentious because of the ridiculous amount of taxes it introduces, he also advocates for the bill and takes it a step further to threaten MPs who are thinking of not voting for it. To add more paprika to the already added salt to the injury, these additional taxes that are being introduced, we do not see them reflect in our daily lives because of the corruption, incompetent leadership, etc. To add turmeric to the paprika and the salt, this same government introduces new unconstitutional offices like Office of the First Daughter, Office of the First Wife by Mudavadi, which I don't know, he's a CS or something, which will be obviously sustained by taxpayers' money. This same government adds 50 CAS positions, which even though the court ruled as unconstitutional, still will be expected to be financed by taxpayers' money. And you asked me whether I think these protests are justified. Guess what? I freaking do. However, in as much as I support the ongoing protests, there are some things that need to be addressed. First, from the various conversations I've had with government apologists, many of them, in defending the government, argue that these protests are unwarranted because the economic situation is already bad as it is and the protests make it worse. To that, I would say that it's unreasonable to expect that people who cannot afford a packet of flour at 200 Kenyan shillings and are in the pits economically should take a step back for the sake of those who can and continue to do, because the economy will affect them. The economy is bad for everyone, but there are citizens who at the moment have nothing, and so for them it's even worse. And if they have nothing, then that also means they have nothing to lose by protesting the already high cost of living. Yes, the cost of living is in the pits, but that's no reason to silence anyone. If anything, that in itself is a reason to protest. Also, many government apologists argue that because of the various deaths and the property being looted that occurs during protests, then protests should not occur. Amnesty International reported that over 30 lives have been lost in the course of these 10 protests to police brutality. Now, to tell people to not protest because of the likeliness of death is diverting from the actual problem, which is police brutality. Instead of targeting the oppressors and perpetrators, you instead target the oppressed, and that in itself is ridiculous. The problem is the police, their violence, not the protesters. On the issue of property being destroyed, while I understand that for some this is a way to make themselves heard, I do not support it. However, there's a problem with labeling all protesters as violent. Yes, there are those that vandalize, but to tell everyone not to protest because of the actions of some is plain ridiculous. I mean, some protesters are goons, that's no question. And if you want to vandalize people's properties, at least let it be politicians' properties, not a fellow citizen like yourself that is also struggling as much as you are. Also, government apologists almost always argue that protests are unlikely to change anything, and for that reason, people just shouldn't protest, because why go through the losses and everything if at the end of it all, still nothing is likely to change? I think this is a very erroneous argument. 10 protests later, and yeah, we can tell that not much has changed. In fact, we can almost say that nothing has changed, but that is not reason enough to silence people. You cannot tell people to not try because you think they will not win. A lot is at stake, and even if it's not today or tomorrow or the next 100 years, these protests will count for something, and no worthy battle is won in a day. And so I'd rather we protest than remain peacefully oppressed and enable the oppressors. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that these protests are opposition-led, which is problematic, but I also believe somehow helpful. The fact that the opposition is the face of these protests presents the problem of the opposition's agenda versus the people's agenda. Because these protests aren't people-led, people-centered problems such as the cost of living haven't been made a priority per se. The opposition have taken advantage of the pain the people are in and merged that with the agenda of the protest to also be about them losing the previous election and removing the sitting president from power. What this does is that it not only misrepresents the protesters' agenda, it also makes it harder for them to be heard, because it is unclear what exactly the protesters are fighting for, which makes the protests counterproductive. A good example of how the opposition's ingenuity is shining through in all of this is when the finance bill came up for voting, and the opposition, that is Azimio MPs, had many traitors like Babu Owino who never even showed up to vote, and not showing up in itself is a vote. Yet he expects us to be up in arms after he gets arrested for protesting. First of all, what is he even doing protesting? You had the chance to vote against this finance bill, yet you're out here protesting. For what? What are you doing? Can someone just explain to me in the comments what the whole purpose of that is? Because personally, from where I sit as a concerned Kenyan citizen, I do not get it. However, in as much as the protest being opposition-led is a problem, I also have to acknowledge that this is not entirely a bad thing. From a citizen's point of view, it may actually be strategic to ride on the wave of the power of the opposition to demand for our rights. We are always complaining about how the people in power are using us. So why not use them? The current opposition led by Raila has power. There's a difference between having power and being in power, and these people have power. Testimony to this is how these past 10 protests, they have been able to bring the country to a standstill. If they announce that protests are happening today, people are not going to work, the roads are empty, businesses are closed, that's power in itself. And as citizens, we should take advantage of that power to make sure we are heard in our views and our interests, and to make sure our interests are somehow utilized in, riding on all this to make sure our interests are heard, basically. And finally, in terms of the opposition leading the protest, I don't think that is always a bad thing. However, this Kenya's opposition main aim is and I think has always been challenging the previous election results and removing the president from power. Surely, I think where we stand right now, there's no need of political sides. Whether you're in UDA or whether you support the government or are anti-government, the harsh reality and the painful reality is that regardless, even if the roles were reversed, the likelihood of these same problems still being there is still there. Removing the president is not an option until his 5-year term is over, because the Supreme Court already spoke on that matter. So the only way forward from now is pressuring him to act in our best interests, not removing him, because that again is as opposed to what, and that's which takes me to the final thing that I have to say in respect to this topic. I am a firm believer that as Kenyans, the root cause of all our problems is that we begin to care when it least matters. To be honest, many of us don't even think things would have been any different had the opposition won the elections. And that right there is where the problem is. The fact that there was not a single worthy candidate to vote for in the first place is the problem. Basically, whatever political side you support as a Kenyan right now is immaterial, because there's currently no leader that was on the ballot box specifically for the presidential seat that was even deserving. Garbage in, garbage out. We brought this to ourselves. You shoot yourself in the foot, don't be shocked that you're bleeding and in pain. We have to take leadership seriously in this country, and it's a collective duty, not mine alone, not his alone, not activists alone, because you might not do politics, but boy, politics will do you. So there are such good people in this country. There are deserving leaders in this country. We just have to be serious about identifying them. This just doesn't apply to presidential seats. It applies to smaller seats as well. How can we have a government full of accused murderers and thieves? How can we normalize that? How can the Nakuru East MP, Samuel Arama, show up during one of the protests with a gun and threaten to shoot protesters?
Hao watu hata nikasema hiyo watu wapigwe marisasi, kwa nini hawezi kupigwa? Mimi nitapiga mtu risasi. Ndio kama mtu baada kwa kanda fanya kazi. Toka hapa muende. Sasa mnakuja kukamatwa na polisi hapa.
We have become desensitized over police brutality, and your silence is enabling their actions. We need to speak up and call out these people. Why are they throwing tear gas in schools at innocent protesters? Why are they not in uniform? Why are they condemning others for feeding protesters? Because you're silent. Also, just because you can't go out in the streets and protest physically doesn't mean you can't protest verbally and online. Social media is a very powerful tool that has proven effective in getting people's needs met, even in other countries. So tag your governors, your MPs, your president, businesses that exploit people. Do not let your silence enable them. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're feeling extra generous and are able to support this channel monetarily, feel free to send money to my M-Pesa number 0794111093. All proceeds will go into buying better equipment that will ultimately influence better quality output. You can send as little as 10 shillings and as much as 1 million. Don't send more than 1 million. That's too much. I won't accept that. So see you guys in the next.